first, I would like to thank the EG student chapter from UFBA for organizing this. And second of all, I would like to thank Roel, which is our guest here today, for accepting my invitation. When I first arrived, when I first invited you told me that you were happy to participate and that you were curious to learn more about what's in the student's mind. So I hope you have a good idea today. So just to give a brief biography of Roel that I prepared. So Dr. Roel Snieder is currently the distinguished professor of professional development education at Colorado School of Mines, where he's also part of the Center for Wave Phenomena, CWP. He has a background in geophysical fluid mechanics, theoretical physics, and seismology. In 2016, Roel received the Outstanding Education Award from the Society of Exploration Geophysicists, SCG. He also holds many other professional honors from European associations, from Colorado School of Mines, and once he was even nominated as the hero of the day by a newspaper in Denver for his work on energy education. So Roel has an impressive number of 293 publications on his CV, not only in geophysics related journals, but also in Nature, many mathematical journals, among other. He also wrote 3 books, one of them called The Art of Being a Scientist, a guide for graduate students and their mentors. And he currently teaches the class Research Skills for graduate students at Colorado School of Mines, which teaches beginning graduate students a variety of different aspects of doing research. Did I do a good introduction? Jesus Christ.
Yeah, no, thank you, Odette. Yeah, thank you for introducing me. Yeah.
Do you want to say something for the audience who is now watching us live?
No, I think I'm just curious in your in what's on your mind, and have a conversation about that. But what I want to add to what you said, and it's sort of embedded in it, is I've always made a lot of changes in my life. And I think I'm basically a very restless person. So every few years I want to do something different. And that's why I moved from theoretical physics into atmospheric science, into deep earth seismology, into more applied seismology, and now professional development education. And so I'm a broad and a shallow type, and I like it that way.
Which is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there's no right or wrongs. You know, there's different ways of doing things.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions that people send over the days to us to ask you, and I always start this by asking something related to Brazil, as this is the Brazilian student chapter. Mm-hmm. Have you had any Brazilian student that work with you?
Absolutely, Ivan Vasconcelos. He was the.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So true. I forgot.
He isn't just anybody, right? I mean, he is a very lively and creative and energetic person, and I absolutely loved working with him. But he's the only Brazilian student I directly worked with. Of course, as you know, in our research team, we've had many Brazilian students over the years. But he's the only student I directly worked with from Brazil.
Okay, would you say that how was the experience? Is there anything that a Brazilian student has differently than others?
Well, I'm not sure. Ivan is such a special person that I would be very hesitant to lump him together with any type of type of group, whether it's nationality or otherwise.
That's true.
I mean, he's an amazing human that I loved working with, and he's a close friend of mine. And it's been wonderful to work with him. But not necessarily because he's Brazilian. He's Ivan.
I know. Yeah. He's Ivan Vasconcelos. That's so true. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now going back to the career part, when and how did you decide you want to be a geophysicist? I know your bachelor's is in physics, but your master's and your PhD are completely related to geophysics. Yeah. So how did you?
Well, that was sort of a circuitous route. So I started studying physics And I think I started studying physics because I thought that the Holy Grail was an equation. In the sense that I wanted to find sort of the miracles of the universe, and I thought I would find that in quantum physics and in relativity, and I loved studying those topics. Much later, I learned that the Holy Grail is not an equation. That was a very naive idea of me. But theoretical physics was not a good fit for me in the sense that I was sort of a B student. I mean, I was doing okay. I was doing good, but I was a B student, and I knew these were extremely competitive fields, and I was surrounded by, and I say these guys because they were all men except there was one female student, and some of them were so incredibly bright. They were running circles around me, and I thought this is going to be a very difficult career if I stay in that field. And also, I felt that the whole work on elementary particles and whatnot was very far from my bed. I thought, you know what? How do we make the world better by studying that? I couldn't see that. So then I switched to atmospheric science. I got a degree in atmospheric science, and I love fluids. I love fluids, you know, and still when I'm on a plane, I want to have a window seat because I want to see the clouds and everything. I'm a big child. But studying that area was a bit frustrating for me because I was basically turned into a glorified computer programmer. There was a time when the big supercomputers became available. They had less power than this, but at that time they were supercomputers. And so, I mean, you had to do computing. And that's not something I particularly enjoy. And then I moved into seismology. I did a PhD with Guus Nolet in Utrecht, which was an incredible experience. And what I really like with seismology is that it leaves space for theory, but also data applications, real-world applications, real-world spin-off. And you can work sort of anywhere on that spectrum from numerical work to theoretical work and make a contribution. So that's sort of, it's been my path there.
Nice. And how and when did you decide to focus in research and become a professor?
You know, I'm not sure maybe I never decided to become a professor. I think it just happened. And I think and maybe I wasn't thinking about it very deeply. I did think about going to industry at one point after my PhD. And this was an amazing experience. I went to, I was a graduate student. I was in the last year of my PhD. I went to, and I was really on the fence. Do I go to industry, which probably would have meant in the Netherlands going to Shell, or do I pursue an academic career? I went to the IUGG meeting in Vancouver in 1987. And somehow I had figured out that there was this professor, Dirk Oldenburg, who had his own company and then went back to industry. And I just got in touch with Dirk and I said, you know, I introduced myself. I said, I have a dilemma. I'm going to be in Vancouver. Can I come and talk to you? So I went to that conference there, and it was at the campus of the University of British Columbia. I went to the office of Dirk Oldenburg, who took 2.5 hours to talk to me. I couldn't believe it. You know, I was a total stranger to me. And for 2.5 hours, he just talked to me. He listened to me. And at the end of that conversation, he says, Roel, I think you would be very unhappy in industry. That was it.
That was it. Okay.
And I thought, because I knew he knew the industrial world and the academic world really well. I had a very high regard for him. I knew his work well, and he really took the time to get to know me. And I thought, okay, if he tells me that this is a bad plan for me, that this is a bad fit, so that was it.
Was the continuation of how did you decide something? How did you decide that you want to help students in their professional development?
Well, you know, as you mentioned, I wrote a lot of papers.
Yeah.
But I woke up one morning and I asked myself the following questions. Whose life have I made better by writing all these papers? And I couldn't come up with any answers. I mean, I'm not asking like, how did I contribute to science? How did I contribute to engineers? I asked myself the question, whose life did I make better writing those papers? And it was very silent. And that is not quite true. You know, I know, for example, that, I mean, I work now with the Institute for Mine Seismology. They do a lot of work on dam monitoring. They do a lot of work in Brazil. A lot of that work is based on my work. And so I know there's been spin-off that in this case has spin-off for society, for people. But I think in general, you know, I think I contribute more by the people that I work with. So then I thought, okay, if that's the case, then I should focus on it. And then so I moved out of the geophysics department, and that allowed me to really focus on professional development education. I like to think I make a bigger change there. That could be delusional. You know, maybe that is nonsense. So I don't want to speak for those who take my classes. But that's what prompted that change. Basically waking up one morning like, whose life have I made better? And I was just wrecking my brain, and I couldn't come up with clear answers. And I thought, wow, that's not impressive after 30 years.
That's a good answer.
It was a very humbling day, I can tell you.
Yeah. So when students come to you asking for professional advice, what is the most common questions you get?
Okay, well, first of all, I give very little advice, because I feel like by this time you're talking to people who are making their own choices. So I see my role more as being a sounding board, offering different perspectives, asking probing questions. Then I do very little advising, in fact. At least I try to do very little advising. When students who are not working with me come to me, it's mostly advisor-related issues. That doesn't mean that their main issues are advisors, but I think what it means is that they want to talk about that things are not going well with their advisor. And that's why they need to talk to somebody else, and that's why they come and talk to me. But it doesn't mean that that's the main problem on campus, because I know there's many cases where the work between students and advisors were great, and students have important and deep conversations with their advisors. So most of the conversation that I have with students who don't work with me is about things not going well with their advisors. And the interesting thing is, I usually ask the question, does your advisor know? And the response I usually get is, no, of course not. And I tell them, well, you know, she cannot read your mind. So what if you would tell her? What would happen? And actually, that in itself solves a lot of the problems. Not always, obviously, but in many times it does. So very often it's communication between students and advisors that somehow gets stuck somehow. And then things don't go well. It may be a motivation issue. It may be, you know, a student doesn't get what he or she needs, and then in combination with a communication issue, that turns into a real demotivating issue for students. And then they feel like, okay, what am I doing here? And do I really want to do this? And so that's how it often works.
It's funny because my next question would be related to being an advisor. For you, what is the most difficult thing about being an advisor?
That's
now
great.
From your perspective. Yeah.
You know, I see the role as my advisor as making myself unneeded. So my role is to, certainly for PhD students, for master students the time is too short, but for PhD students the role is to get them to scientific maturity. It's actually the same role as, I mean, I raised 3 children, and also as a parent, your role is to be unneeded. That doesn't mean that you haven't left an imprint or something, or you didn't have an impact or whatever it is. But if, let's say, if a meteorite would hit me now, they would be just fine, right? They might miss me, but they would be okay, right? That's sort of, and so I see my role as an advisor like that too. And so you have to get students to a state of interdependence. So interdependence is not independence. So dependence is that you are dependent. That's sort of the clearest case, right? Independent is that you go your own way, and that you decide what you're going to do. And I know many advisors might say they want to get their students to the state of being independent, but that's not good enough. You want to get them to a state of interdependence. And interdependence is that you, on the one hand, you are independent, in the sense that you know what you want to achieve, you know what you want to do, but you also are aware that you're part of a network, that you are not alone on this planet, that we do the great things that we do usually through collaborations, that you're social animals. And that is why interdependent is sort of, it goes beyond independence. And my job as an advisor is to get students there. And some students never get there. There are students who get stuck in a state of dependence, just like some children stay in a state of dependence with their parents. There are students who get stuck in a state of independence. They become sort of belligerent. They start to fight me. And I love it when it happens. I love it when it happens. It's because it's part of the normal growth. If it doesn't happen, I'm sort of concerned. It's usually very short in graduate school. But you really want them to take the next step. And that means they become your colleagues.
That's true.
And I love it when that happens. But to get them there, it's a tricky game, you know, because in the beginning they really may need you. You may have to give them a project to start with, which is simple enough that they can do it, which is sort of small enough that they can do it. I'm not particularly good at doing that, by the way. But then you want them to go beyond. And that's I see as that's the main thing that we should be doing as advisors. But it's a difficult game. There's cross-cultural issues that play a role as well.
That's true. Now going to the geophysics related questions.
Sure.
So for you, what are the hot topics nowadays in geophysics for research, in your particular opinion?
Well, I think there's a lot of things happening in the area of computing. And of course, I mean, artificial intelligence is on everybody's mind. My guess is if we're going to look back 20 years from now, there will be some things where we feel like, well, that was basically overhyped and it didn't go anywhere. And there's going to be some spectacular changes, right? I mean, we start to use computers in a different way. And I think I'm not working on it myself because I spent very little time on research, but I think it's very exciting. And I think it's probably going to be a mix of spectacular successes and spectacular failures. And that's how these things work. And that's okay. I think the other thing which may or may not be around the corner is quantum computing. And that is going to, I mean, if that comes off the ground, the game is going to change completely. Now, we're not there yet. You know, there's some very simple prototypes which have a few qubits that are talking to each other. But when we start talking about really big systems, I think things are going to be happening really, really quickly.
Okay, so how do you see the use of noise as a seismic source? In which studies can we use this application?
Yeah, so, you know, the use of noise as a seismic source is something I've been working on for like 20 years now. And I want to take us back to the meeting we had with the sponsors for the Center for Wave Phenomena. I think it was 2002. And one of our sponsor representatives got up and I can mention his name, Joe Dellinger, who's a very eclectic and broad thinker. And Joe said, you know, he said, I love this work, but I just don't see how I can explain to my managers why this might be useful for us. And he's been writing a lot of papers about this, right? He's been doing it. I think there's obviously let's first talk about the weak point. The weak point is that this only works when there is a good bath of seismic noise. Which means the noise has statistical properties that don't change much over time, and it comes in from many, many different directions. And then there's a ton of opportunities. So I think one of the opportunities, and that has been shown to be feasible, is monitoring, dam monitoring. Has been, you know, we know how to do it now, but the application, there's still a lot of applied work to do there to make it operational. But also, don't get me wrong, there's also some spectacular failures in seismic interferometry. You know, for example, getting the body waves from noise has turned out to be extremely difficult. and we know why now. And there are some studies that show some body waves, and you look at it and you say, yeah, sort of looks okay, but not spectacular. So there's also, even though there's some real successes in terms of monitoring with surface waves, monitoring with body waves has been very, very hard for reasons that we understand very well now. I think what hasn't really been explored well is downhole tools. This is, of course, where DAS can play a big role, because there you may have your permanent downhole sensors. And I think the other option that hasn't been explored well is what I call crappy sources. So there are situations where we don't have a good noise bath, but at relatively low cost, you could probably install a noise source that does exactly what you want it to do. And there CGG has some piezoelectric vibrators that have been used for that purpose, but I think there's much more that can be done, and it hasn't been explored yet.
Okay, so important new seismic imaging techniques have recently been proposed and developed as data-driven techniques like Marchenko imaging. Mm-hmm. Do you think these techniques will be the future of imaging, or there is still a lot to develop in this area?
No and yes. First of all, I mean, we are incredibly lucky that we can use seismics. We are so why? And this is sort of fortuitous, but think about this. Basically, the frequencies that we use is dictated by the penetration depth, because the Earth is attenuating, and so that forces us to basically work with frequencies sort of between 10 and 60 hertz. If you go to much higher frequencies, you just don't get the penetration that you want. And even for these frequencies, if you go to very deep reservoirs, 10 kilometers depth, attenuation is limiting the resolution that you are getting. I mean, that's happening right now. So the frequency range is basically dictated by the amount of attenuation inside of the Earth and the depth of the reservoirs. Now, for some reason, the reflection coefficients in the Earth in that frequency band are not very strong. We typically might be speaking about 10% or so, which means that it's mostly single scattering. And that means that all those imaging techniques, all the migration schemes that have been developed, in the 50s and some of them even earlier, they just work pretty well, because basically in that frequency range, the Earth is a single scattering medium. And if that wouldn't be the case, we wouldn't be able to drive our cars. We wouldn't have been able to find the petroleum that we have right now. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, but we did. And so in general, I think the multiples are fairly weak. And if they wouldn't be weak, then seismic exploration would have been impossible in the way we do it now. Now, having said that, there are situations where the multiples are strong. Pre-salt is an example. I mean, that's a good Brazilian topic. And there's other layers, there are many near-surface situations where the near-surface heterogeneity is very strong, and where the multiples, either free surface multiples or internal multiples, are really messing up our capabilities to do the imaging. And that's why the Marchenko imaging can help. And absolutely, there's a lot to be done there. I mean, we're not done. And to make these things work, I guess this holds for many of the things that we do in geophysics, but to make them work on real data is a real art. Right? It's a very different thing to sit down there and write down all your math and whatnot, and to make it operational is a big step.
Okay. So the study of earthquakes has advanced a lot and still fascinates us. Mm-hmm. Geophysics uses the information to help us, understand the structures inside the Earth. In your opinion, what would still be the frontier regions of knowledge in this field of seismology?
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, earthquake hazard obviously still is a big issue, right? I mean, earthquakes are worldwide, about 40,000 people die because of earthquakes, so they're not a major health risk, but there's certainly mega disasters of earthquakes. When it comes to safety in earthquakes, earthquake prediction has always been the holy grail. I'm sort of very cautious there. But I think the interaction of earthquakes with society is a big one. Because we do have, even though worldwide the number of earthquakes death is not that high compared to, you know, traffic, smoking, many of the other things that we are exposed to, or that we expose ourselves voluntarily to, there is a real potential for mega disasters. And in the past, we've had earthquakes where we would have, you know, close to 500,000 casualties. And so, but I think that's mostly almost like a social or an economic problem. You know, how do we deal with hazards in a responsible way? And as humans, we are very, very stupid.
That's a good word.
Yes, we are not willing to invest much in our safety, and but that's what I see as one of the major earthquake-related issues. Now, there's many scientific issues, of course, and I don't know. I think I've been drifting off on a complete tangent. That probably wasn't what you're looking for.
No, it's your opinion about that. That's what we were looking for. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Now moving to the teaching art of science part questions.
Mm-hmm.
So a question to help new researchers. In your opinion, how does a good research idea that produces meaningful results come up?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think the short answer is in a million different ways. And I think it's very individual, but I think there's not many good ideas that came up because people were just doing very complicated math or very intricate coding. I think the idea always comes earlier, and I think, I don't know, you know, for me it's a very social thing. A lot of ideas, I generate a lot of ideas talking to other people. So I think it's important to talk to others. Sometimes, I don't know, something just pops into my mind, and so I think it really varies by person, but I think it's a very creative process. It's a very most of the time it's a very non-logical process, and it requires many different things. It requires creativity. It requires courage. It requires the willingness to step out of the box and to do something nonsensical. Sometimes it happens by play. You know, there's quite a bit of discoveries that were made by just people playing, doing something. They weren't thinking, they were just playing, which is great. You know, I love the whole story of the discovery of special relativity, where Einstein asked himself the question, what if the speed of light would be the same for everybody? Which seems like a nonsensical question. And then he started doing his math, which actually wasn't that complicated. If you read his paper, the math is not very complicated. And then, you know, he developed the theory of special relativity. He changed the world. By the way, I want to say, read the original papers. You know, go back to the 1906 paper of Einstein and just read it. I mean, it's just beautiful in its simplicity. Get an English translation, that would be my recommendation. But, so they arise, it's the way creativity works, and that's different in different people. It's not a logical process most of the time. Sometimes it is.
Okay, about your book, The Art of Being a Scientist,
Mm-hmm.
Where did you get the inspiration to write it? And in your opinion, what is the secret of being a good scientist and a happy human? Yeah.
Here it is. Here it is.
Yes.
This is the Shameless Commerce Department. If you buy this, I get 25 cents. That's a big deal. Well, it didn't start with the book. It started out with a course that I started teaching, because when I came to the School of Mines in 2000, I became aware that we do basically nothing to prepare graduate students in their career as a scientist, other than the interaction with the advisor. And the interaction with this advisor sometimes is great, most of the times it's good, and sometimes it's terrible. And that often we don't teach students explicitly skills to be effective in science. So then I started to develop that course, which at that time was called The Art of Science. It was a disaster in the beginning. I would sit there with 5 students, and that's how these things happen, right? You try something and then you modify it. But I've always, this is also how I wrote my math book. I would develop course material, but at the same time, I would have the plan of, well, maybe I can turn it into a book. So at one point I commit to turning it into a book. And then that's what happened here too. So I would write handouts for the students, but I already had a bigger thing in mind on publishing it. So then at one point I thought, okay, let's just commit, let's just turn it into a book. And that's what I did. And then it can grow in sort of a natural way. The students are the guinea pigs, because you give them the material and you ask them for the feedback, so that helps you also to make it better. And sort of grows in a natural way then. It's still a lot of work. It's a lot of fun too.
And what is the secret of being a good scientist and a happy human, in your opinion, based on the art of science itself?
So how do you define a good scientist? Because you can measure that in many different ways, right? How would you like to measure it?
I don't know. That is a tricky point too.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you my secret.
Okay.
But you will not tell anybody, will you?
Oh, I cannot promise.
No, I think what has always worked very well for me is it's a combination of two things. I'm very much oriented towards producing tangible things. So I just gave you an example. I would teach a class, I would develop materials to hand out in the class, but already in my mind I would have, okay, maybe I'm going to turn it into a book. And then at one point to commit to turning it into a book. So at that time, I'm basically doing two things at a time. I'm developing a course, I'm developing material that supports the course, and I'm laying the foundations for a book. And that makes it very efficient. It's an efficient way of working to keep in mind, like, okay, how can I use that? The other thing is I'm a firm believer in taking a step back from your work. And I've always done big activities next to my work. When I worked in the Netherlands, my wife and I were both working. We were raising 3 kids. I would leave home at 3:30, take care of the kids many of the days. And then I'd work in the evenings again, and I was the amount of hours I put in all of that was crazy. I looked like a piece of shit. But it took my mind away from the research. And when I moved to the United States, I became a firefighter. I put a lot of work in there, a lot of work. I'd get up at 2 at night, come back at 5 in the morning, sleep for an hour, get up at 6 and teach a class. Wow. That sort of thing. I became fire chief, which was a major job next to my job at Mines. And I think it has always helped. On the one hand, it made my life more complicated, but it has always helped me to take my mind away from my work as a scientist. And I think that distance helped me to reflect and expand. And I think it's very important that I do that. And even now, when I'm stuck on a scientific problem, I go outside, I put on my running gear and I go for a run. Now, most of the times I just go for a run and there's no progress with my problem. But I've been amazed how much problems I solved on the trail. And I wasn't even thinking about my problem. And I think that was the key, that I wasn't thinking about it consciously, but subconsciously I was thinking about it. 80% of our thinking we're not aware of. If you read the books of Jonathan Haidt, he makes that point all the time. And so you have to give that space too. And now there's also time when you just have to work hard to get something done. It's a balance between the two. So that has worked for me to take a distance as well. But I don't know if that works. For other people, that may be different.
It particularly works for me too. So I really like your point of view. Yeah. Sometimes I really need to try to think about something else and
reset.
These moments, sometimes I solve a problem that I'm like for hours instead. So yeah,
that happens.
Oh. Okay, next question. A scientist once said, "Science gives us knowledge and religion gives us sense. Both are prerequisites for a decent existence.
Mm-hmm.
About the conflict between science and religion, what is your opinion? Okay to answer this because I don't know, like, because it has religion inside too. So are you comfortable?
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, this is a topic which is dear to my heart because I teach a class, Science and Spirituality, where we talk about those issues. Well, first of all, I don't think there is a conflict as long as you don't stick to literal interpretations of religious texts. I mean, if you stick to literal interpretations of religious text, then of course there is a big conflict. To be honest, I think that's pretty. I would not advise to go there, and even the whole evolution Christianity debate. If you read the story, very few people know this, but if you read the first 2 chapters of the book of Genesis, the story of creation is told twice, not once. It's told twice. There are significant discrepancies between the 2 accounts. So even there, in the same religious text, you have significant discrepancies. If you're interested in this, I can really recommend the book of Francis Collins, The Language of God. Francis Collins was the leader of the Human Genome Project. In fact, there were 2 Human Genome Projects: an industrial project and an academic project, and they were in a neck-to-neck race. And the team of Francis Collins won, which is a good thing. Otherwise, your genes would be patented by now. And he is now the director of NIH, and he wrote a book in which he describes what it means for him to be a Christian and to be a scientist. And he goes into a lot of details into this issue. So, but I don't see that there is a discrepancy. I think the big division line is: do you believe that the world is a purely material affair or not? And that includes our thinking. If that's personally, that's something I don't believe, although I cannot prove anything. But the world, if all my thinking was just biochemistry between my ears, a lot of the meaning of my life would evaporate. And then what role is there for morality? What role is there for free will? What role is there for meaning and responsibility? And it seems to me a very cold and distant world, and that's what I see as the biggest division. And of course, there's many people who do think that that everything is just an expression of matter, right? And the whole recent neuroscience movement is reinforcing that by basically looking for correlations between neuronal processes and thinking and experiences, which doesn't prove anything in my eyes. So it's a big topic. I would encourage everybody to take my class in that regard, because we spent a whole semester on this, but I think it's a very important topic. What I do see of the students who take my class is, and that's sort of an unexpected side effect, is they speak to the mental health benefits of taking a class like that. And we have a lot of experiential processes in the class. We meditate, and I think it's really important for our mental health. And by the way, anybody who's interested in joining meditations, we have meditations at the School of Mines now. You go to www.mines.edu/meditation, and you can see the times and the Zoom access. And I'd love it if you would join us.
So is it open for everybody?
It's open for everybody. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I didn't know.
So we even have somebody from South Africa who regularly joins us, and the meditations are at 8 in the evening Mountain Time, which is 4 in the morning South Africa.
Midnight in Brazil.
Yeah, so it's not a convenient time. I'm aware of that. And
but that's great. Like, maybe someone cannot sleep one day and want to participate and have a good moment of spirituality. Why not?
Yeah. We have a real mental health issue among our students. And I think as educators, we should take this very seriously.
That's true.
And especially, this is a particularly challenging year for many of us.
Very true. Everybody's in some way struggling with something, and it's just.
Yeah.
So thanks for mentioning the meditation at Minds. Yeah. So based on your passion for teaching, what advice would you give to those who want to pursue a career in academia?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, I mean, a career in academia, it is a challenging career, right? Because it's basically the whole system is set up to there's fewer and fewer positions available the higher you rank. So there's more undergraduate student positions than graduate student positions, and there's more graduate student positions and postdoc positions, and there's more postdoc positions than faculty positions, and it goes on like that, right? And it's sort of so it is a very competitive career. I think one thing which is really important is you need to publish. You need to publish, and you need to publish early. You need. I would definitely, I tell the students I work with, I say, don't write a thesis, write papers, and put them together into a thesis, so that by the time you graduate, you have a few papers on your CV. And and many search committees, they will tell you, oh, we don't count the publications. It's just they count the publications. I mean, so I think it's very important you got to publish. I think you also need to ask yourself the honest question: do I really want to teach? Because it's very interesting. If I talk to my colleagues, I hear a lot of complaining about that they have to teach, and I tell them, dude, that's what you signed up for. That's your job, If you don't want to teach, then why do you work at a university? Well, you could work at a university as a research professor, but I think many faculty are not honest about their willingness to teach. Or maybe it's not their willingness to teach, it's just that you basically have a double job. You're expected to teach, and you're expected to do your research, and you're expected to bring in the funding and everything. So it's demanding. It's a very demanding job, but it's very telling. Words matter, right? Words are really important. Our choice of words matter. We typically talk. Almost every university that I know of speaks about teaching load. What is your teaching load? That's a common question. That's a very interesting way of phrasing it, right? Because that already implicit in it that it's a burden that you carry with you, and it's just part of the job that you have to do.
That's true.
So I really want to also let you rethink your ambition to teach. Is that really what you want? And maybe it is. I'm not saying it's not. But I think many more people in academia say they want to teach, but when it comes down to doing the teaching, they're not at home. And part of it is because of the pressure to also do research and to generate research funding. That's part of the issue. But if you really want to teach, you might be better off working at a community college, where the only thing you do is teach.
True.
But I would say, you got to publish. If you don't publish, it's not going to work. And the other thing is also prepare yourself for a teaching career. By the way, until I came to Minds, I've never ever had any formal training in teaching. And I'm very fortunate to work at a university now, which has a very active education institute, the Trefny Center. And they've gotten me out of some bad habits when it comes to teaching. So teaching is also something that you got to learn and that you got to be trained in.
Okay, moving to questions about Minds now.
Mm-hmm.
So Colorado School of Mines is one of the most important universities in the world in the field of applied geophysics. Why do you think that it has this recognition?
It has this accomplished, you say?
Yeah. What did you say?
Your question is why
do you think
that
do you
happened?
think it's recognized like that as one of the most important?
I think there's a lot of critical mass, and some of that critical mass was a deliberate choice. I mean, like the research consortium where you and I work, Odette, started because the School of Mines took a bold step and they said, okay, we're going to create 4 positions to work on imaging. And they hired 4 mathematicians who basically knew very little about seismic work, and then just build it up. And of course, that's only one of the groups at Mines. We have many other groups at Mines. Also, we have groups in petroleum engineering. We have very good groups working on hydrates, and so it's very broad. I think also Mines has kept it up. Many universities have closed down their undergraduate programs with in geophysics. I shouldn't say closed down. They have combined them with other programs, and in practice that often has been the kiss of death, because then those fields became marginalized. So I think I think it was a deliberate choice to build this up, and then those groups were very effective in building connections with industry that lasted, and so basically persistence to stay the course. So I think that's how it happened.
That's good.
Companies are laying off thousands of people after the pandemic starts, and has been 8 months by now. What should we be expecting from now on? More layoffs, or do you think? How do you think it's going to be the recovery of the oil and gas industry once this pandemic is over?
I don't think it's going to go back to where it was. And the role of geophysics in oil and gas production has already changed a lot with hydraulic fracturing. It became much more a game that was driven by drilling technology than by geophysics. So that has nothing to do with the pandemic. That started 5-10 years ago, and you see this. And I think that trend is going to continue. That doesn't mean that geophysics will go away, but I think that the field is going to be smaller than it used to be. And I think also ultimately as a society we have to wean ourselves of hydrocarbons. And to a certain extent that is happening, and they will not go away. You know, if you read the book The Oil Endgame by the Rocky Mountain Institute, which is like a think tank on sustainable structures, they say, you know, if we're talking about weaning ourselves of hydrocarbons, that's going to take 30 or 40 years. But I think we have to do it, and at one point we will do it, and we will do it the easy way, or we're going to do it the hard way. With the hard way meaning just disaster happening. So in that sense, I think it is going to be, and I know this is not a very motivating thing to say, but I think this is going to be a field that is shrinking. Having said that, there's a lot of skills that geophysicists have that are marketable beyond the oil and gas industry. And I'm thinking about big data. I'm thinking about doing big inversions, estimating uncertainty, computational skills. Those are all skills that are marketable beyond geophysics. You can add machine learning to it. You know, a lot of data science things you can add to it. And this is why when I was still in the geophysics department, I pushed very hard for the department to move in that direction, with limited success, I should say. But I think we have to do that, and I think we have to capitalize on what are we good at as geophysicists. So I think we can we can market those skills. There's jobs out there, but we have to be willing to change the way in which we do things. And if we stick to doing what we're doing right now, we're going to do that in an environment which I think is going to be shrinking, and it should be shrinking. It should be. So this may not be what you want to hear, but so the advice I would give to any graduate student is, you know, diversify yourself beyond the traditional imaging skills. Go into, you know, it could be computational, or it could be, you know, other technical skills that are marketable beyond geophysics. But maybe I'm too pessimistic or too optimistic. I don't know.
You're being realistic.
Yeah, I think, and we should tell it to our students. And I see this with our undergraduate class. I teach an undergraduate research class now to 30 undergraduate geophysics students, there are 2 students who do something petroleum related out of those 30. They could pick their own topic. I didn't give them topics. I said, go out, talk to faculty, figure out something you want to do. 2 out of 30. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the final questions, I have just 2 more questions of the final remarks. Which advice would you give to students who are starting their studies now in geophysics?
Well, I guess some of the advice I just gave, you know, I mean, make sure you build up a sort of a diversified skill set that you can market broadly, which means that's mostly now in the computational arena. I think that's one of the most important advice I would give, and I tell that to the students who work with me. You know, we have very explicit conversations about it. The other thing is, which I think is really important, do something that you have a real passion for. You know, I mean, there's a lot of people who have very little to choose in life, who don't have enough to eat, and we are the privileged ones, right? You can, if you talk to especially students who go to graduate schools, those are the students that get higher education, go on to tertiary education, and do something that has a real meaning for you, that you find fulfilling. Don't prepare yourself for a career you don't want. I sometimes meet students who clearly are demotivated, and I sometimes ask them, so what's the plan? Is the plan to prepare you for a career you don't want? And sometimes there's plenty of people in the world who have to do that. There's billions of people who have to do that. My guess is that those who are listening to this interview are not in that group. So yeah.
So the final one, because I asked before about starting students who are starting now, and how about the ones who are graduating now? What advice would you give?
Well, there's still lots of options, and even if you work within one organization, there may be a choice to make in what you're going to do within an organization. First of all, I'm a believer in the ability to change. We can reinvent ourselves. The only thing is, as you get older and older, the price that you pay for changing becomes higher and higher, both psychologically and also in terms of sacrificing things that you have achieved. But I'm a firm believer in change, and I think that by the time, let's say you finish an undergraduate degree, and you might be 22, 23 years old, you're not defined by what you have studied. And there's plenty of examples of people who study one thing and then go on and do something else. And I think the same holds true when you have finished a degree, a graduate degree. So then you might be older, you might be in your late 20s, but it still doesn't define completely who you want to be. But I think even if let's say you have let's say the issue that we just talked about, right? You know, if you have a degree in seismic imaging, and you're going to work for a big petroleum company, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. I would, if there's any influence you can have on the choice you're going to make, I would think about, okay, how can I develop skills that are broadly marketable? And that might be, you know, working for a big petroleum company on, you know, artificial intelligence, or, you know, clever optimization methods, or, you know, I mean, just things on problems that are popping up everywhere. So I wouldn't go for a very specialistic topic if you have the choice then. Does that make sense?
Yes. These were all the questions I had. Okay. We still have 2 minutes, so if you want to say your final words, I will first thank you for again accepting this. I hope you enjoyed. It was really good to know a little bit also about your opinions and about your mind and your career. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah. Well, thank you for meeting with you. You know, I really appreciate it, first of all, that you're doing this. I think it's very important that you set up this series to talk with people and get a variety of different views. And I'm sure you will hear different views and opinions. And it's good, because there is no there is no one truth. That the world is not as simple as that. So I really want to applaud you for doing that. I also want to applaud those of you who are listening to be there, to have the sort of the willingness to learn. I think it's great. I think if I had to give one thing with you, I think the human mind is an amazing thing. The fact that we can understand the world is an amazing thing, right? And we have a choice in how we want to use that mind. To what purposes do we want to use our mind? And it's a good thing to think about. You know, how do I want to direct my creativity? How do I want to direct my energy to do whatever I want to what I think is important? And I cannot tell you what is important, which is a good thing, because that's one of the things we need to figure out while we're here. And as you can hear from my past, that may change over our lives too. And that's a good thing. That means we change, we evolve. And I just want to wish you fun in that whole process.
That's great. So thank you so much, Roel.
Okay,
and
thank you.
Let's finish here. Thanks everyone who is watching us, and see you in the next edition.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.